Good evening and welcome to blackdoctor.org. I am your host, Ask Dr. Renee. And tonight we are talking about Alzheimer's and the caregivers. A lot of us in this generation are now taking care of our parents. And thank God they took such good care of us. We're going to take good care of them. But we have tonight a doctor with us who was a caregiver, but who has also dedicated part of her life to helping caregivers. And then we have a caregiver who recently, unfortunately, his father did die, but he, I'm sure, took excellent care of him. So we're going to talk about Alzheimer's and the caregiver tonight. So I know that affects a lot of people. So please, I always ask, I need everyone to like and start a watch party. Everyone like and start a watch party. Tell your friends, tell your family members. I know at some point you're going to have to care for somebody in the middle of a pandemic. It might be a COVID patient, that is your loved one. Please make sure you start a watch party, like and share this out, and let people know that we are having this discussion tonight. And as always, if you have any questions, you can type them in the comments and I will do my best to get them answered. Okay. So let's meet our guest. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
So tonight we have, I'm going to put your names up there. There we go. We have Dr. Nicole Rochester, who is a pediatrician, but now is all things caregiving. First person I thought of when we talked about this discussion. And we have Brandon Burke, who is a new author, who also is a caregiver like myself and like Nicole. So thank you guys so much. So Brandon, I want to just start with your story, and then actually Nicole will probably go into yours too. But let's start with Brandon's story.
Okay. So my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2015. And unfortunately, like you said, he passed away just this past November from complications of the disease. But for 5.5 years, I was one of his primary caregivers. I decided to write a book about our story and talk about our journey as father and son, not only just from the Alzheimer's perspective, but also just from childhood and how it led us to this moment and how Alzheimer's really impacted that relationship and impacted how we, related to each other. During the later part of his disease, he lived in an assisted living facility. But, I was there to make sure everything was going straight and, do all the things you need to do. And my book really talks about how, even though the beginning of our relationship when we were kids, we weren't as close, but we got closer as I got older. And there's some, things that happened and things that, I discuss in the book that talk about the journey and how we got to where we were. But it was a really, I want to say it's kind of like an awkward kind of, not responsibility, but in a sense, it's like, you get this kind of feeling of gratefulness for being, a caregiver for your parent, but it's kind of awkward to be in that position at the same time.
Yes, very awkward. Yeah. I want to ask you, as far as Alzheimer's, what were the signs or what led him to go and get tested?
So my grandmother actually had the disease as well. She passed away in 2002, so it was his mom. And it was something that we as a family kind of have a familiar history of, and so it was like we were always looking for the signs, and my dad and his siblings, just to see if anything was changing or going as they got older. With my father, what I saw really was kind of behavioral changes. People really talk about things like memory as being the main issue with Alzheimer's, but that's just one piece of it. It's behavioral things too, such as them forgetting how to do certain things, or right. My dad was really, really good with directions. And one time we had a birthday party for my nephew and he got lost. And that's something that my father never would have done, and on top of that, he was very frustrated about it too, and so we were like, his demeanor kind of changed a little bit as these things were happening. We were trying to figure out what was it that was causing that. So I think that, when you're talking about Alzheimer's and talking about dementia, it's not just about memory loss. It's about behavioral changes too. That was one of the most significant things. He also, I talk about the story in the book where he called me a different name. And, when you're thinking about things like, I have brothers and sisters, and he could have called me any one of those names, but he didn't. He called me Brian, which is, close to Brandon, to some degree, but he had never called me that before in his life. And so in my mind, I was like, something is not right here. And he tried to like kind of play it off and act like what I meant. But to me, it was definitely a marker.
Yeah, definitely. And so what made you make the decision though for him to be in assisted living?
So there was a point where he was staying at home, so he wasn't working anymore. And I would go over about 2 times a week to visit him. One of the days when I wasn't there, my aunt, on the days that I wasn't there, my aunt would come visit. His wife, my stepmom, is a doctor, so she wasn't able to be home as much. And so one of the days that my aunt hadn't gotten there yet, and when she did get there, he was gone. He normally went out for walks and things like that, but this day actually, I shouldn't say that. My aunt didn't get there. She called and he didn't answer the phone because he didn't take his phone with him. That's what it was. He didn't take his phone with him, and he normally had, but there were times when he would forget. But he was gone for hours, and we all had to leave. I had to leave work. My stepmom had to leave work, and my aunt and my uncle came to help search for him, and I was able to find him pretty quickly. Actually, I just kind of knew what he typically would do, and I kind of used that as my guide to see where he may have been, and luckily he was right where I thought he would have been. But that was kind of that was the deciding factor of, okay, we have to do something different now. What we were doing right at that moment wasn't working anymore.
So, Dr. Nicole, do you advise people on how to find the right assisted caregiving place? Because, dear God, I mean, you see enough commercials on TV with the lawyers saying, have you had, elder abuse? But I mean, because of what I've been through this year, I can see it happening because, especially during COVID, because we were not allowed to visit.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it was horrible. I mean, you call and I was like, do you realize we're in a pandemic and we can't come? So we need you to be our eyes and ears, and you just have to take these calls.
Yeah. I can't even imagine that. I mean, I've thought about that a lot, but yes, to answer your question, that is one of the services that I provide. So you mentioned I'm a pediatrician. I'm also a health advocate. A lot of people don't know what that means, but I primarily work with family caregivers, and I help them navigate the healthcare system. I help them jump through all those unnecessary hoops so that their loved ones can get appropriate healthcare. And one of the services that I provide is to help research assisted living facilities, nursing homes, rehab facilities, because as you stated, Dr. Renee, not all facilities are created equal. Yeah. and there are some facilities that I would not put my dog in.
Bingo.
And, and they're very expensive. And so, the last thing you want to do, of course, the safety of your loved one is the most important thing, but you definitely don't want to shell out, many of these places are $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 plus a month. And to think that you could pay that amount of money and your loved one is not even receiving appropriate care is just, unacceptable. And so I do help. That's one of the services that I provide. And, it's difficult with COVID. Previously, I would often accompany my clients to the assisted living facilities or to some of the other skilled nursing.
You can't even go check the places out now.
Exactly. You can't even get in. And so, you have to be crafty and you have to do a lot online. But my heart goes out to all of the caregivers who.
Now, not to cut you off, when did your father die?
So my father passed away in 2013.
Okay.
Yeah, February of 2013.
Now, was he in a facility or you guys were taking care of him at home?
Was also, and my story is I was listening to Brandon. I'm like, wow, there's so many similarities. My dad had vascular dementia as opposed to Alzheimer's dementia and a lot of other health challenges. And yes, he was in an assisted living facility. When my 2 older sisters and I first started caring for him, he was still living at home by himself. And initially we tried to make that work. And just like Brandon mentioned, we took turns going to his house and fixing meals and checking on him and calling him throughout the day, reminding him to take his medications. But within a few months, it was clear that just was not going to be enough. And so we moved him into an assisted living facility as well.
I understand. So I've talked about it several times, but my dad's had several strokes this year. And my dad, the rehabs, what we realized was in the rehabs, they just weren't doing what we would do. And so he wasn't progressing. Whereas because we would talk to him on the phone and he just really didn't have a whole lot of words. And, it was just, but when he comes home, oh my God, the man talked to me under the table this weekend. So, so he clearly does a lot better here with us than he was going to do in a facility because I think because one, my father is not American. And so because he's a foreigner and he's the only foreigner every time he goes to these places, then he's the only Black man when he goes to these places. I think he's just not going to really talk to you anyway. But, here he'll talk to us and, even his family would call the place too. But still, here they call and he talks to all of us. But it's just, you can see a whole difference. And actually, they mentioned vascular dementia to us because he's had strokes. Clots in his brain, obviously. They mentioned that to us, but they're not sure. And I mean, honestly, I will tell you that I've seen a change. The man is literally, it's like peeling an onion slowly but surely. He says things that you're like, you remember that. You said, it's like, wait a minute. So I can see that my dad is coming back. And so as frustrated as he makes me sometimes not wanting to take his medication, I'm very prayerful that this next Christmas he'll be back to my dad. But that's
wonderful.
It's small steps. I was telling Brandon before, my daddy couldn't sit up. Now the man sits on the side of the bed for hours. It's just
wow.
That's baby steps. But the thing is that we feel like he was in 2 rehabs that just did nothing. And one of them, I'm almost certain, gave him COVID. So my dad, he came home for 3 days and he had a telemed visit and they said, something's not right. We think he needs to go back to the hospital. And so they were like, call an ambulance or drive him, but he has to go back. So he went back and sure enough, they were right. They did an MRI. He had another stroke. So then they kept thinking that the strokes were coming from his heart. So they wanted to do a test there. And before they did that test, they had to do a COVID test.
Wow.
And they were like, it's positive. We were like, what? So the thing is, my father's had no quote unquote COVID symptoms, but I've spoke to a lot of us doctors and they're saying that this clotting thing also can be COVID related.
Yes.
So we're like, well, maybe that's what, I don't know, because he ended up having to go back in the hospital again in August with more strokes. So, maybe it is. I don't know. But they told us, and this is crazy, my father he really wants to get up and go. He is ready to go, even though he hasn't quite realized he can't walk sometimes. So he kept falling. Like every day we would get calls from the rehab, he fell. So we were like, can you put a seatbelt on him? And you know what they said?
I know exactly what they said.
They said no, because it'd be a fire hazard. Now
that's not what I was expecting. I thought you were going to say restraint, because there are very strict rules and regulations regarding restraints. And when my dad was in the assisted living facility, he also fell fairly regularly. Thankfully, he didn't hurt himself. And we wanted to get him a bed with bed rails. And they said, no, that's a restraint. And so the only thing we could do is buy him a pad, like a padded mattress to put on the floor, so that when he did fall out of bed, he didn't hurt himself. Yeah.
No,
so I thought that's what you were going to
say.
They
said fire, and we were like, but he can't walk.
Wow.
So if there's a fire, he's not sprinting anyway. You know what I mean? Like, come on. So the craziest part is that when he went to the 3rd rehab, they had him in a seatbelt. This was a rehab hospital that is known for this. Shout outs to Rehab Institute of Michigan. They are excellent at the inpatient hospital rehab, and they were phenomenal. And they had seatbelts. And I think because of COVID, they gave us the seatbelt. They gave us like a whole lot of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Because they were going to throw it away.
Yeah.
And they also had 0 COVID cases and wanted to keep it that way. And so, they obviously they temperature checks and all the questions every single day that we visited. And then we always wore masks there. It was great. Now, my dad, because he was a flight risk, as we called him, they would have him out by the nurse's station so they could keep an eye on him and he couldn't fall, right? But they didn't always have a mask on him, which is why I think the man got COVID, because there was COVID patients in the rehab. And we knew that because the doctor slipped up and told me.
Oh, God.
And he's like, but we have them in a separate unit. But my dad is out in the general population with no mask on. And how do we know he didn't have a mask on? Because we FaceTime him sometimes and see him.
Wow.
Ooh, this is scary.
So, not all rehab and nursing homes and assisted livings are created equally. You find some that have great caregivers there that are amazing nurses and staff, and but then you have some that it's just like, dear God, like.
And the other thing
Also,
is that honestly, during COVID, even the ones that are normally good, everybody, they've just been under a
Just
lot of
stretched
stress.
thin. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Brandon.
no, I was going to say the other thing with those places too is the turnover. There's a lot of turnover in who the providers are. And so you have to worry about new people coming in and how are they going to be, and that's also, one of the big issues I think in the industry.
Yeah.
When you look at, that turnover rate, it really can affect, especially someone with Alzheimer's who needs to have type of a routine and gets used to a certain person or a certain behavior. And you have someone new coming in who, is completely different, and that really can have an impact on them too. Really hard.
So, Brandon, you mentioned that you would still go all the time for all the things that need to be done. I don't think people understand when you put somebody in an assisted living place, that doesn't mean the responsibilities off of you. You are still a caregiver. So talk about some of the things that you had to do.
So, I mean, just making sure that, he was getting his meals, making sure that, did he get his shower? Did he, are you shaving him? And then they'll say things like, oh, well, he didn't let me. And I'm like, well, let me try, you know what I mean? So then, you do it and he's fine. But I think that there's a level of familiarity with family members that they'll probably do a little bit more for you than they will with others. My father, I'll say this, my father loved pretty women. So one of the ladies at the facility kind of fit the description of what he may like. So he was always willing to do what she wanted to do. But if somebody else came in there who didn't fit that description, he was not so kind. And then also I think, there were a few people who were had foreign dialects. So, getting him to understand what they were saying sometimes was a hard thing, and so, you have to think about all of those. And my father he was in a facility that was set up like a home. So it wasn't like that traditional like nursing home type of assisted living. It was in a single family house. And we thought, that would be a better option because at least it gives the idea that you're at home, but, there are drawbacks to that too. They don't have as many activities. They're not able to do as many things necessarily as a more facility type of place would be. So, it's a lot to consider. And, I always say, you have to make the best choice for you. You can't, and there's no real right or wrong. You just have to be involved,
Right.
I agree. And I just want to piggyback on what Brandon said about making the right choice, because I'm in a lot of family caregiver groups, even though I'm no longer a caregiver. And I hear a lot people saying things like, oh, I would never, put my mom or my dad in a facility, or I promised my grandma that we would never do XYZ. And the reality is that, every patient is different and every family is different. And sometimes we have to make decisions that, well, always, we have to make decisions that we think are best for our loved ones and also that are best for us. And, so like Dr. Renee, you said your dad definitely does better around family. For some people, it's the opposite. They don't listen to their family members, but they'll perform better and behave better for staff. But there's so much guilt with family caregiving, and a lot of us, current and former caregivers, you have so much guilt about every decision that you make. And I just think it's important to, we're all doing our best. You make the best decision. Sometimes you have to pivot. Sometimes you make a decision and you realize, okay, that wasn't the best decision. And then you pivot, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think people don't understand, and I'm sure you understand, the whole logistics when it goes to paying for these facilities and Medicaid and Medicare and all of that, because that is a huge thing, unfortunately, is figuring out how is this going to be funded.
And most times it's out of your own pocket.
That's exactly right.
All the costs that we paid for that assisted living came straight directly from out of pocket. My dad luckily had paid into a disability insurance when he was working, and so he had that up until he was 65. My dad was 65 when he passed away. So
oh wow,
it's very crazy that this happened the way that it did.
Wow.
He turned 65 on October 4th, and that's when those payments stopped. So we only really had 1 full month of not having that assistance with it. But even still, when my stepmom told me that I think his Social Security benefit for November, they wanted the money back because he passed away in November. So they said, we can't pay you for the whole month of November because he passed away. It's nuts. You're literally exhausted thinking about all the things that have to go into this, and I think the other thing that people don't realize is that you really have to develop a care plan, and one that is progressive, that really takes you from the beginning stage, the middle stage, the end stage of whatever it is that you.
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, it's going real slow, Brandon. Okay, he'll be back in a second. But I completely understand that because my dad is in a wheelchair, we have to have all this transportation to appointments.
Yes.
Appointments. And he can't just jump in the car. So
yes.
And I told somebody, I go, you want to go into business? You need to go into the business of transporting seniors.
Absolutely. That's
the amount of money to go 10 miles. Woo!
You're absolutely right.
It is.
We have a service in Maryland, in the DC, Maryland area called Metro Access. And, that's what we use for my dad. And it's I don't remember the exact cost, but it's definitely less expensive than some of the private medical transportation services. But because it's so heavily utilized, a lot of times there were issues, sometimes, and he was a dialysis patient. So this is how he used, this is the transportation he used to get the dialysis. And sometimes they wouldn't show up, or, they would be late, or maybe he was moving too slowly and they would literally just take off and leave him. So yes, medical transportation, that is definitely a need.
And Brandon, are you back? Uh-oh, he's frozen and we can't hear him. Okay. I didn't know. I had no idea, but I'm like, my goodness. Now, thankfully, we live very close proximity to the hospital, and a lot of his appointments are there because they have a free shuttle service.
Ooh, nice.
And that was just because he was inpatient and I had seen a little bus, and I called and was like, they were like, oh yeah. And I go, how much is it? They're like, free. I go, what? Free?
That is wonderful.
Yeah, so that was a blessing. But we found, there's been great resources to tell you all about the transportation. It's just that it's not cheap.
Yes.
And I mean, when I say not cheap, like I said, $150 to go 13 miles.
One way?
Round trip, thank God.
Oh, but still, that's
that's not adding in the waiting fee.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's like Brandon was saying, there's so many costs that go into caregiving, and most of these costs are not covered by health insurance because they're not considered medical expenses,
transportation. It was like, I asked them, I said, do you cover the transportation? And the lady said, well, we do. If you call an ambulance. And I said, and she said this like with the straightest face, clearly. And I'm listening on the other end of the phone, like, is she for real? So I go, ma'am, so you think I'm going to call an ambulance every time he has an appointment, and that makes sense? I go, that does not make sense.
Not at all.
I do not think I should call an ambulance. And then they also said, we might pay for it going, but not on the way back. But you won't know until.
How does that make sense?
I was just blown away. I'm telling you, this caregiving, like Brandon said, you need to write it all down and get it, because there's so many logistics involved. Then medication.
Yes.
The cost of medication. We all know it's not cheap. Brandon's back. Good. We know medication is not cheap. And it blows my mind what insurance covers and what they don't cover.
Absolutely.
You have diagnosis though. Like the diagnosis is right here. Why wouldn't you cover anti-seizure medicines for someone with seizures?
You don't want to get me started on insurance companies. That's that is the bane of my existence. And you're right. I mean, there's so many layers, and I think a lot of people who care for seniors like we do and did, you assume, many people assume that Medicare covers everything, and it absolutely does not. And many people don't realize that there are still co-pays and co-insurance, and so many people get confused with the whole Medicare enrollment process, and some seniors don't have the plans that they need.
They don't make that logical for us young folks.
Not at all.
Because every time I see the commercials, I'm confused. I listen to the, Part A, B, I'm confused.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. I got it. We had someone who wanted to know your information, and we'll definitely get Dr. Nicole's information. I guess they might need some help. Okay. Brandon, I wanted to make sure we put the link to your book up here. Can Brandon hear us? If someone could type it's breaking up. Okay. Oh, he's gone again.
Oh no.
Okay, well, I tagged Brandon in the post. The author, Brandon, I think, is his Facebook page. So please, you guys, visit that page and make sure you purchase his book. It sounds like it is a very good book. And Dr. Nicole, please talk about your services.
Sure. So I have health advocacy services where I do anything from helping family caregivers understand a new diagnosis, working with them and their loved one to understand a new diagnosis, to map out a plan in terms of, what doctors they need to see, help them understand their medications, interpret medical documentation, doctor's notes, lab results, things of that nature, advocating on their behalf in terms of sometimes getting second opinions or finding specialists. We talked about facilities. I'll help research nursing home facilities, rehab facilities, assisted living facilities, home care agencies, really everything related to that journey of getting your loved one appropriate health care. And
your gpsdoc.com is where they can find you?
That's correct. That is my website, Your GPS. Okay. I'm on social media at Your GPS Doc on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Okay, awesome. So anybody who needs these services, and I think we all do at some point, unfortunately, but definitely, because you just don't know. It's best to have someone who already knows how to navigate it than to be the blind one going in. We had a family friend that was in this space, so she could help us and tell us about, what acute from subacute rehab, she defined it all for us and knew people. And so I was like, okay, unfortunately, because of COVID, though, we were restricted on where he could go.
Yes.
So I made them test him 2 more times.
Good for you.
I was like, I refuse to believe this. They were like, my mother's like, well, then call. The doctor said you can call. And so I called and I said, he needs to be tested again. And then the doctor, he was so nice. I guess because I was a doctor, he gave me a cell phone number. Was like, feel free to text me.
Oh,
I was like, could you please?
That's wonderful.
I really needed that man to be negative because I knew where I wanted him to go, and he couldn't go. He was positive. I was like, please, Jesus. So yeah, I'm sure I drove some people crazy, but I mean,
that's okay.
I had no choice. Not to mention, because we were in a pandemic, I was stuck in Chicago and my dad is in Michigan, right? So I was stuck in Chicago up until July 3rd, and that's when I finally made it to Michigan. But yeah, I had to be safe. So Brandon is back, and
I'm back. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Technical difficulties. My power went out during one of these.
Oh wow!
I was like, I'm the host. What just happened?
Right. My goodness.
So we understand. So Brandon, the author, is your website. They can get the book there.
They can. It's called Rediscovering Dad and Discovering Myself. I don't know if you can
bring it back. Yep. Now tilt it a little forward.
Yep.
Perfect. We can see.
There you go. So it's a picture of me and my dad on the front. So
nice.
Yeah, I did a silhouette. Yeah. I wanted it to kind of be for everyone. I didn't want people to kind of look at the cover and say, oh, they're Black, or oh, they're this or what, because I feel like the story is for anyone and everyone. So that's why I chose that.
Look,
awesome.
Somebody read your book.
Yay!
Yay!
That is my aunt.
You didn't have to tell everybody that, Brandon.
That's right.
Nobody knew that but you and her.
That's
I
true.
tell you,
It's
your
just
publicist
funny.
needs to get on you about that. Awesome. Oh, and your brother is watching too. Thank you.
Oh, is he? Oh,
He gave your link as well. When we
I
couldn't
love
hear
that.
you.
I love the support. I love it.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. But yeah, so I appreciate you guys talking about this. And because I know that, especially Brandon, this is so new. And I so appreciate you coming and talking to us about this. Because unfortunately, Alzheimer's and dementia are two things that a lot of people are going to have to deal with in this lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, they're estimating 14 million people will have Alzheimer's by 2030 or 2050, something like that. So, I mean, right now it's 5 million people, and it's the sixth leading cause of death. So, I mean, it's crazy.
It is insane. And November was Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And I really feel like it's something, like I said, there's many things it needs to be talked about every day of the year, because they do need to do research and figure this out. Because I know that if they do the research, put the money towards it, they can figure it out. They just have to keep working at it. There's so many things, obviously, that we don't know, but Alzheimer's is one of those things. It's like, they do think it is a genetic thing. So they do think, just like you said, your grandmother had it and your father and your siblings were looking. They do think that. Your dad was relatively young, though.
Yeah, my grandmother had it got it around the same time frame too.
Oh, wow.
Right. Wow. So, the other thing that comes into play, you start thinking about, okay, well, what does that mean for me?
Right.
Exactly.
That's one of the hardest things to kind of deal with when you're dealing with the situation.
But what I do know, I've read a lot of reading and stuff, because, like I said, we deal with dementia and different things. I've read there are ways to eat yourself not to get Alzheimer's.
Exactly.
That's my thing, is to try and make sure you exercise, eat right. There is a lot of power in food.
Absolutely.
And I am quite a scientist, and I believe in medicine. I take medicine daily, but I know that food can also help with that.
And mitigating your stress too, like making sure that you're doing things to keep your stress down. I think that's really important. And in a situation like this, it's really hard, because your stress level automatically goes up because you're dealing with this, and then you're trying to tell yourself, okay, let me not be stressed out. How can I figure out ways to do that? And I think it's really important for people who are caregivers to take time for themselves, because if you have not cared for yourself, you can't care for someone else.
Right. So you know what? When we were going to the hospital every day, my thing was I would take a shower, but I would never put on lotion, and my skin was just a wreck. It was a wreck. Because I would just be hurrying up so we could hurry up and get to the, to the rehab in time. And because, they have visiting hours.
Mm-hmm.
So and we need to be there at the top of the visiting hours so we can talk to whomever, whatever therapist. And so I finally started putting moisture back into my skin. Oh my God, I feel like a new person. It's those little things, and honestly, my birthday, I hired a trainer. He comes 3 days a week.
Nice.
Oh, I love that.
I was like, I am going to fall apart if I don't get it together. Not to mention, because my dad is in a wheelchair, I have to use this lift, and that lift is not light for me to pump. And pump, because it's not electric at all. It's completely manual. Ooh. And so I pump him up in this lift. My father's a full-grown man. And I'm only a 4'11" woman. So I was like, I'm gonna, I'm not, if somebody in this house has to be able to do it. My mother is a senior citizen as well, so I'm like, I can't ask her to do it. So I said, I have got to make sure that I'm in better shape so that I can do what I need to do. So yes, I have my trainer comes 3 days a week, and I go, that's my self-care, my hour. That's 3 hours out of the week that I get to work out and sweat it out and, whatever. So it is very important. And if you can't, it's best to not do this by yourself. If you can, by any stretch of the imagination, you need help. And that's where like home health care comes in. I was told by one of the PTs, you can go to care.com and find somebody to sit with your dad. I said, what?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I was like, I thought that was just for babysitting kids.
No.
Nope.
So all these little things that I didn't know, I was like, okay, taking notes. And so this is great information, but you have to do something. And in a pandemic, I'm not going anywhere anyway. But like I said, this working out at the house is my little thing that helps me out. And once my dad is like knocked out or in bed, then we'll watch TV or movie, and everything's done for the day. We're good. So we get to catch up on our shows. And so, that's our little thing that we can do. And then after Thanksgiving dinner, we played Uno because that's helpful for him as well.
Yeah.
So, it's just little things like that.
Right.
That
I wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying about help. I have a little blog on my website, and one of the topics that I did was about asking for help, because I think that there's so many people who don't want to do it, or you think that as a caregiver, especially if you have siblings or other family members, you think that they're automatically going to step in and say, what can I do? How can I help? What can jump in immediately? And sometimes people don't know where to start or don't know how they can help. A lot of my siblings live out of state, so it was a matter of, they would ask, well, what can I do from here that can help ease you, what you have to do. So if it's, one would call around to the assisted living facilities to find one, what I mean? So all those little things that you think, oh, let me go ahead and do it because I'm the primary caregiver, you can ask other people to do it. And there are people, they're willing to do it if they are given, the space to do it, and you have to allow that.
And we had meals being delivered at one point.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree. I mean, you have to, I think a lot of people, like Brandon said, they want to help, but the standard answer that we give people, knowing that we are completely drowning, and some well-meaning church member or neighbor or family member or friend will say, what can I do? And you go, oh, I'm okay.
Yep.
Lying. So we really have to allow, like you said, we have to let people into our circles. And I tell my clients, make a list of the things, even if it's something small, like, can you go pick up this prescription? Can you sit with mom? I mean, it's a little tricky with COVID, but can you sit with mom or dad for 2 hours while I go get my hair done or whatever? Right. But there's always something that other people can do. And I think sometimes caregivers are so overwhelmed with the day-to-day that they can't even really think of what to offload. And so just sitting down.
That's why I sit there and Mom, I can call such and such and such and such and such and such.
Yes.
Right.
Like I said, medication's expensive. I'm good with the computer. I can research how we're going to get this medicine cheaper.
There you go.
And she's okay. And, and then I come up with the solution. Here, this is the solution. If you want to go to the drugstore, that's fine. Or I can go, but this should be this amount now. And so it's, just like you said, just those calls, even searching websites, whatever it is, little things I try to take off her plate so that she can, she can just have a moment to just breathe, just sit. Like today, she just needed to sit. I took a nap today because I never take naps, but today I knew if I was going to do this, I needed to go to sleep. I was like, I'm about to pass out. And so I took a nap today too, and actually she called me 5 minutes before the alarm came off and was like, I was like, here I go. But yeah, you have to ask for help. And I realize that there's people in my family that have trouble asking for help, but you just have to butt in and say, I can do this. You don't have to do this. I can do this.
Right.
I can do this to help you. I'll pay for this. I'll take care of that. Like my job has been transportation. So she usually makes the appointments and then I figure out how they'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, he can't just get in the car. We got to figure out which transportation provider can get him there the cheapest and the safest.
Right.
Yes.
So
every little bit helps,
Yeah.
I think that's what people have to understand. And, I also wanted to kind of talk about, when my siblings aren't in the same place, and you're the kind of primary caregiver, you sometimes feel a little bit of resentment because you're like, I'm the one that has to do it. And, they don't have to worry about this or that. But, I was having a conversation with someone else and they were telling me that, sometimes the person or the sibling, the family member who's not local, they have the same type of guilt or resentment that they feel bad. And, as a caregiver, sometimes you don't realize that they feel bad as well. They feel like I'm not able to do this, or I'm not able to be there. And so I'm not contributing in any way. And so we have to allow a little bit of grace and space, I think, for people who are in all different types of situations, and allow them to be as a part of it as they can be.
Yeah, my sister actually lives out of state. So, and actually I live out of state, but I'm able to work from anywhere, so I could come here, but we call her 24/7. She's usually on FaceTime talking to her father to help us. Anyway,
and my two sisters are local. I mean, I was blessed in the sense that my two older sisters and we all live within like 15, 20 minutes of each other. So we were able to just jump in and care for our dad together. But, we do have siblings that were out of state. And you're right. I mean, and then, the flip side of that, though, is that sometimes, and I hate to say this, but there are some families where some of the siblings really don't want to help. And
right.
I see this a lot with some of my clients, and even in some of the Facebook groups where, there's one sibling that's doing everything and everybody else is just kind of like wipe their hands of it.
Yep.
And that just breaks my heart because it's so hard. It is so hard being a caregiver that I can't even imagine if you know that you have potential help, and they're just deciding not to. I don't know. I'm thankful that I wasn't in that situation, but a lot of people are.
Right. And I'm thankful. My sister, she'll come at the drop of a dime and she'll be right here. Like, what's next? And when she comes, I get a break because she'll get up and she'll help them out. So.
But I think that's why, and I say this, that sharing our stories is our superpower, because it helps us, connects us. If you don't tell it, then no one else will be able to, people benefit from it. And so you telling your story will help someone else, or it can get you the help that you may need sometimes.
Right.
You're telling that story to someone else and they may say, oh, I have a solution for you. And so we think, we want to keep it to ourselves, or it's private, in our community, we don't tell a lot of our business, and there's things like that. And, certain, Alzheimer's is, looked at, looked down upon sometimes. Right. And people think, they don't look at it as someone that needs care. They're looking at it as the person is, lost their mind. And it's you have to. It's
a disease just like cancer is a disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great and I think very helpful. We've had a lot of people say thank you for sharing your story, Brandon, and they look forward to reading your book. So we had several people that talked about their parents that are currently going through this. Somebody said their father's currently in the hospital with Alzheimer's right now. So I know that this has been great information and very helpful. So please, you guys, don't hesitate to reach out to these two. They've given you their information, and I tagged both of their pages in the post. So you can always click on their pages, on their Facebook pages, like their pages, and definitely communicate with them that way. And of course, there's always all other social media as well. But thank you so much, and you guys have a great evening.
Thank you.